All right, so I currently work as the state 4-H volunteer specialist for the Wyoming 4-H program here at the UW campus. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to really look at the audience I work with. And so my study is on volunteer motivation and why adults choose to volunteer with the Wyoming 4-H program. So the purpose of the study for me was that we currently have about 7,000, just under 7,000 youth that we work with here in Wyoming. And we have a staff of less than 30 that serve those youth. And so really we rely heavily on a volunteer base to make sure that those youth are served. With that, we also have limited funding for recruitment, training, and retaining our volunteer base. Most of the funds that we have are used for those 30 staff people, and the additional funds are used for programming with the young people that we work with. I'm hoping that learning more about volunteer motivation can help me better target recruitment, training, and retention efforts, and the limited funds can then be used to get the most bang for our buck. Before starting this survey, I really wanted to look at what motivates volunteers. And so my review of literature was very focused on influences of motivation. So what it found when I looked at it, I looked at both profit and nonprofit sectors, was one of the motivators was relevancy. Which makes sense. Honestly, all the motivators I found make a lot of sense. Relevancy basically means that the things that you're doing are relevant to you, whether that be your personal or your professional life. One of the studies looked at people who volunteered in other countries with the healthcare system, and the people who wanted to become doctors or nurses were more motivated to volunteer for those kind of things because it was relevant to the work that they plan to do in their future profession. Another motivator was leadership. And this isn't the ability to gain leadership skills. This is the actual leadership that happens within your volunteer experience. So if you're volunteering in 4-H or any organization and you have a leader who believes in you, listens to your ideas, is a great communicator, helps you to gain better skills and be more active, you're going to have a better or more motivated experience than if you have a leader who doesn't display those characteristics. A third motivator was the ability to be able to give back to whatever it is you're volunteering for, which also makes sense because we choose to volunteer for things that are important to us. So if we have the opportunity to give back or influence what's happening within the organization, we're much more likely to be motivated to volunteer for them. So for my survey, I had two basic research questions that I wanted to look at. The first for me was what motivates a person to volunteer with the Wyoming 4-H program? And then in turn, what are barriers to retaining the volunteers that we do get? Some conclusions or hypotheses that I came up with that I thought would happen through the survey is that we would find out that adults in Wyoming volunteer because their children are involved in the program. Adults also volunteer in Wyoming 4-H because they have a history. Maybe they're alumni in 4-H, they had parents that were in 4-H, their spouse, things like that. And then also kind of based on the research is that adults will give back to the program or will volunteer for the program because they want to give back to to their community, kids, a program that helped them. Additionally, I think adults, volunteers, the barriers, they leave the program because they don't get the support they need, and they probably leave the program because maybe there's no value in what they're doing. So my methods for this was that I did a survey. My survey had 8 questions that focused on motivation, and 9 questions that focused on barriers. In addition, I did a demographic section where I asked them how many years they'd been a volunteer, how they got involved with the 4-H program, what county they were currently volunteering in Wyoming, and what role they were playing, whether they were a project volunteer, they were leading a club, they were a chaperone. There are numerous answers they could choose. So I sent the survey to 1,441 unique emails that I found through our enrollment data. Basically, people enroll online and enter an email. So whether they check that or not is a whole other ballgame. The survey was open for a total of 1 week. I did send out 1 reminder throughout the middle of the week to make sure that people didn't forget. I found that the reminders actually spiked the survey responses. 269 people completed their survey with an 18.7% response rate. So what I found. So here you can see is a table with the means and standard deviation of motivating for volunteers. So I asked them questions like, do you volunteer to help others? Do you volunteer because you know that there's no one willing to take over your responsibilities? You can see if you look at the mean, the lower, the better, because one was strongly agreed that that was why they were volunteering. helping others and addressing youth needs in the community, and a need for their skills in the 4-H program were the highest or lowest means that came out. So those were the ones that people felt most strongest about. I did my survey in Qualtrics, so I have some additional Qualtrics data that may just help people to understand that. So if you can see here, it shows that over 100 and it looks like 60, about 180 people said that they strongly agree that the reason that they are in 4-H is to help others. Where the one that they strongly disagreed on, the reason they're probably not in 4-H is they're not looking to build their resume. So this is just kind of a good visual with some color that can help you really to see where the responses came in, and can help to analyze some of the data to see where we probably need to focus our recruitment efforts. So if you look at the hypothesis that I came up with, the one that adults volunteer in the 4-H program because they want to give back was definitely shown through the fact that we have almost 180 people say that they are in 4-H, strongly agree with the fact that they're in 4-H because they want to give back. So the second one was about barriers. So if you look at this one, if you were to end your volunteer experience, what would the factors be that contributed to that? And so the lower the number here, also the better. So you can see that if you look at them, people are saying that the lower reasons are the level of commitment from parents isn't adequate, the level of commitment from members isn't adequate, and that the volunteering takes too much of their time. Interestingly enough, they're all kind of at the 3 range after that, but those are ones that tend to be that were a little bit lower and towards the strongly agree section. So once again, here's the same, you can kind of see what this looks like, the same Qualtrics data. So if you look down here, people strongly agree that the barriers would, or strongly agree that the barriers are that yellow line is the level of commitment from 4-H parents. And then if you can see that really people just overall disagreed with the fact that they were going to leave 4-H. Hopefully that's maybe because the people that we asked were currently in 4-H, and so maybe none of them are planning to leave, which is a great thing for us. So I can say that if you look at the hypothesis I came up with, I put yellow kind of supported is they volunteer because they don't get enough support that they need. This one I really focused on their feeling that they got support from the extension office, which I'll deal with in a second here. But also I think the green one, they leave because they don't feel valued. The parents and members aren't giving the time to the program that the volunteers feel they are, and maybe don't feel that value. A couple other graphs I just want to show you because I found them interesting, and maybe you will too, is that our program is based in a county. And so every county has a different educator in it that is supposed to support the 4-H program. So one of these graphs, the question was, do you feel supported? That one of the reasons you might leave is because you don't feel supported by the extension office. And so this kind of goes through and it shows an overall display. And the interesting thing that I found here was that some of the reason on a personal note, I've worked with this program for 3 or 4 years, and I know where we've had conflict and high turnover. And some of the conflict and high turnover is where the large dips happen. We just lost a staff person in Uinta County, and you couldn't see that that's where they definitely felt that they were not being supported. We have had high turnover in Converse County. So if you look there, they're one of the lower options also. So this is kind of interesting for me in my position, because I think maybe this isn't something that's research that I want to put out to the world, but I think that the idea of staff turnover and conflict can definitely help to determine how people perceive the support that they're getting. So one of the other demographics I used was how many years you've been in the 4-H program as a leader. So you can see that most of the people that responded to my survey had been in 4-H long term. I'm not sure the reasoning for this. Some inferences I've made is that maybe it's because they care more about the program and so they're willing to answer a survey. But with that data, I wanted to see if there were differences in how they felt about training or a need for training. So the black and white graph on the right says that there's not enough training and that there is too much training. So interestingly enough, there isn't a huge significance in any of these. And by years, basically, they all kind of felt that they disagreed with both of those statements. I also wanted to prove my hypothesis about why I think people volunteer, and I thought this would help to do that too. This was the question, how do you find out about 4-H? They could choose as many as they wanted to, so there was extra answers for this question. But you can see that 44% of the people that answered the survey were a 4-H member, and 37 of them currently had a child enrolled in 4-H. So if you look at that, that is over 81% of people fit into one of those two categories. And so I think that that then helps to prove the hypothesis that adults volunteer because their children are in the program or because they have a history. Interestingly enough, one of the answers was other, and when you look at the reason they put for other, most of them were a spouse was in 4-H, a mother-in-law, their parents were in 4-H, maybe they weren't. And so really that number is probably even higher. So based on the data I collected, some conclusions or inferences that I've made for using this data is that when recruiting 4-H member or 4-H volunteers, I think it's important to base efforts on appealing to people's desires to help the youth and community. Those were the highest things that people felt that was why they were volunteering. So if we're going to recruit people, we should probably use those things to appeal to them. We also need to look for a way to show people that their skills are needed, because that was the third highest one. And so if we can make sure that people understand that we need them in our program, that it's not just for because their kids are in it, that I think would be important. So we could market for specific jobs. Like we do a robotics program. So if you don't have a robotics program in your county, then maybe we need to market for that specific job. Also, if we do have people in our program that have skills, we need to make sure that we engage them with their skills to make sure that they are actually using something that's important to them. With our retention efforts, we need to create a culture that allows volunteers to give as little or as much time as possible. If you're not familiar with the 4-H program, I think we've had a culture where it's almost, I've heard the word life sentence, where they have to give everything to the program. So helping to train our season 10 and plus year leaders that they don't have to give, or it's okay for someone to not give all their time, is probably an important thing that we can do. We also need to increase the commitment or perceived commitment of parents and volunteers, and help to work to create relationships of support with extension staff, especially in those counties with high conflict or high turnover. So some limitations, if I would do this again, or as I encourage others in other states to maybe use similar questions to look at the motivation of the volunteers throughout the United States, is that my response rate was only 18.7%. I was honestly pretty excited about that, but in order to publish, it might need to be a little bit higher, so I may have to redo the survey or open it up for an extended period of time. The current survey was currently only available via email, and not all of my volunteers are actively engaged in their email or checking their email, so there may be a need to send out a paper form or have paper forms available through their local extension educators so they can get that at a local level. I also only had the survey open for 1 week, mostly because I needed to get this done. And so I think that we need to maybe do a little bit better advertisement to get people engaged in that survey. And it might be good to sit down with some leaders and do a higher qualitative study rather than a quantitative study to help explain what they meant by some of their answers to the barriers or the frustrations that they feel, so we can get a better idea of what things need to be changed in order to make them want to engage at a higher level or to retain them for a longer period of time. So that's all I have. If I was actually giving this presentation, I'd ask for questions at this time, but I hope that you'll put them in the chat and let me know some things that you'd like to see different or ways I could change my survey. Thanks so much.